Women working in television. Is it a young girl's game? That's what we're here to talk about. You know, obviously there's a lot of us. There are a lot of women in creative industries. And many of them are in senior roles. You can tick them off. Dawn Airy, CEO of Five. We've got Eileen Gallagher, who until recently was running Shed. Elizabeth Murdoch, of course, runs her own indie. Several channel controllers. We have Claudia Rosenkrantz, Living TV. We have many channel controllers at BBC, including Jay Hunt, who's with us here tonight. If you look at the age spread, though, there's an exodus of women over 35. It's very, very clear. Why are we losing these experienced, these valuable, and these qualified women? Well, to start us off, we're going to have a view from Skill Set. So Kate O'Connor is here, and Kate O'Connor is the Executive Director of Policy and Development for Skill Set. So over to Kate.
First up, I want to show you the stats across the creative media industries, which 3 years ago had our women represented to 38% of the workforce in the industry, and that has dropped in the last 3 years to 27%, so way below the national average. You'll see here we're kind of dragged down by certain other sectors, not TV. Computer games kind of stands out there, and there's also some other particular occupations that pull on the stats. But even when we look at the healthier statistics of TV, in the last 3 years, the stats have fallen from 45%, which is pretty good, in line with the national average, to 41%. And, of course, you may say, well, the last 3 years have been incredibly turbulent. Overall, employment has fallen 10% in the TV industry, but that's 5,000 women that we've lost over the last 3 years, compared with just 750 men. One of the issues is the kind of jobs that women do, and maybe they've been affected most in this recessionary climate. So taking a look at that, in fact, these trends are pretty stable. Women are very much overrepresented in maybe some obvious areas, costume and makeup, wardrobe and so on. We're hugely underrepresented in technical roles. Moving on, I'll tackle this age issue. These are the statistics for the overall economy again, and the balance between men and women in the workforce is pretty even, irrespective of age. When, however, you take a look at TV, we see a very different picture. What we found when we looked at our latest survey, which I think is really interesting for both men and women, you're far less likely than your counterparts outside creative media to be married, to have a long-term relationship. You're very much more unlikely to have dependent children, and that compares so badly with what's happening out there in the rest of the world of work. Finally, women in the industry are definitely overqualified, overworked, but underpaid, according to our research. Overqualified in the sense of overqualified compared to men. I hasten to add, not overqualified for the job. In terms of working patterns, admittedly, this is self-declared working hours. Women are much more likely to work longer hours and work more days in a given week. And when you put that stat against average earnings, they're also likely to be paid a lot less. Skill Set does have a role to play in the solution. I think some of the issues are about skills and training, and we need to do much more to address those issues. But it strikes me that some of the issues are also about status, also about culture, and most definitely about employment and working patterns within the TV industry.
Thank you very much for doing that. It's sobering, let's put it that way. On my right, we have Camilla Lewis. She's head of factual features at Talkback Thames. Next to her we have Jay Hunt. Jay Hunt is controller for BBC One. Next to Jay we have our man, I won't say token man, but you are a token man. Simon Chaps. He's the chairman of Mercury Media and also of the National Film and Television School. Most of you may know him better as the ex-ITV Director of Television. Rebecca Berry. She's a former TV producer and now a founding partner and a psychotherapist. Anne Morrison, who's the director of the BBC Academy, basically taking training to new heights at the BBC. And last but not least, we have Kate Kinnamont, CEO of Women in Film and Television. Kate, is it a young woman's game? Is it just very difficult to be in the media and have a family?
Well, I think it is today. I think, say 20 years ago, when most people who worked in television worked for a broadcaster, if you were lucky and you got into the BBC, as I did in the early 80s, they were investing in you. So you were there for a job for life, you would get training, you would have attachments, people had, sick leave, maternity leave or whatever. But I think in the years since we have become a very fragmented industry, it's very difficult.
Jay,
the thing that's certainly been true to me is I have always regarded it as my own responsibility to find a way through these things. So, there have been points in my career when I had a young family and I was commuting back and forth to Birmingham, and that was incredibly tough. But I took a decision at that point in my career that it was an opportunity for me to move out of news, to be blunt, and to do something different. So there've certainly been occasions where, if I'm completely honest, one or other part of my life has been to the fore. But I've always believed that you can find a way of making this work, but it will involve an awful lot of compromises, and not all of it will work all of the time.
Anne, when you listen to that, I mean, what's your take on it?
I took the course of marrying a poet when I was quite young, which is not a career known for its long-term earning potential, I have to say. But that had the upside that not only did he turn out to like the domestic chores around the house, but also he was able to, really take the lead in bringing up our daughter. I must say, when I joined the BBC, as I did in the early 80s, like yourself, Kate, it did feel very secure. It was investing in itself. There was more of a sense of a job for life, but you did feel really you were in a society of men, at least I did. And the women that were there, it was interesting. They'd had to marry the job. Virtually none of them had children. It was, they'd had to sacrifice so much in order to pursue this, and they'd had to be tougher than all of the men in order to get on. But actually, I think we owe them a debt of gratitude, because actually they made it easier for our generation that came afterwards. But nonetheless, I mean, now it is a different world in the BBC. So in BBC Vision, we've got more than half are women, including at senior levels, including over 50s. So actually we've come a hell of a long way. I think the real issue, in a way, is elsewhere.
Camilla, she says the BBC's changed. She says it's really the rest of the industry that has the problem. What's your view?
What terrified me looking at those statistics was, in a way, it's not me and people like me that I'm really more concerned about. It's actually awful that in the technical world that 2% of those people, don't tell me that women aren't good at that stuff. What's going on there? And why are women leaving at that age? Why are we allowing that drain to go? And I know why we are. It's because there's a lot of people who want to work in television. There's someone cheap around the corner who's willing to do it. People are willing to cut corners everywhere. It's actually bigger than a woman.
So, Rebecca, you were in the industry, and then you decided to leave the industry. What's been your experience?
Well, I was freelance for independents, and it was very unstructured, which is why it was difficult to go back. But part of the...
To go back after you'd had
To go back
kids.
after kids.
Right.
But part of the wonderful thing about... There was also a wonderful thing about the lack of structure, which was, you were able to do great job to great job. You were able to get promoted quickly in a very unstructured way. But having an enormous amount of fun, then having a baby, and going back was very different and very difficult, because I was a different person. My priorities had changed. And I did, I'd had a very good time. The last job that I'd done was a series producer job. So I didn't want to go back in at that level. I didn't feel that, because of the amazing sort of hours that I was working, that it would require to go back and do a good job and to be comfortable doing a good job, I didn't feel ready.
So you made the decision.
So I made a decision.
It's time to leave.
Yes. I mean, I crept back. I did a little bit, but it didn't feel
Did
good.
you, I mean, what would have taken to get you to stay?
A full-time job.
A full-time job, okay.
It's about certainty, and it's about taking control.
Right.
And suddenly, having children, and having a career where I felt I had very little control in terms of the jobs that I would get, the hours that I would have to work. And so that was very uncomfortable for me, not to have that control. And so, I chose a different path where I had control.
Okay. Simon.
I think the first thing to say is I don't know quite what I thought those numbers were going to be before I saw them, but I'm genuinely horrified by them, having seen them. And I think there's a lesson there, which is that I think over the years, for some reason, gender equality got squeezed out by ethnic diversity and disability, but those organisations were far more vocal about the problem. I think we kind of assumed that gender was broadly speaking okay. That being said, I think there's an extraordinary danger quite often in these kinds of sessions that everybody sort of thinks it must be somebody else, not them, who caused the problem or had the problem more acutely than they did. Certainly, London Weekend Television, where I worked for many years, had a workplace nursery, seemed to be a very child-friendly company. There were lots of parties where kids came. Partners quite a lot of partners worked in the same place, and people accepted that one person had to go home and look after the kids or pick them up. I think sort of what happened, and maybe this has been acute in the last 3 or 4 years, is the economy changed and companies began to chip away at those kinds of benefits, and we see some of the consequences here. The casualisation of labour, the growth of the independent sector, far less benefits within broadcast organisations, in some cases, perhaps not all of them, has meant we've sort of ended up slipping into this problem without senior managers, frankly, being aware that the problem was of the scale that these figures have illustrated.
What have we had to sacrifice, or what have you all had to sacrifice to get to where you are?
The key thing is an attitude about it. I mean, I am very positive and sometimes too positive. But when I hear, what some of the things you were saying about how, it felt like you couldn't cope with it, I really understand that's difficult. But there are ways you could make it work if you'd have had the motivation.
It wasn't that I couldn't cope with it.
Yeah.
It was that I chose not to.
Absolutely. But I think you can choose to cope and make it work.
Well, I mean, I chose to do something else.
Yes.
Not because I couldn't cope, but because the structure, there was no structure. I was a freelancer going from contract to contract, independent to independent. So there's no...
I understand, but I think often...
Underpinning.
Often in television, it feels like there's lots of little villages, and if you get stuck in your own little village, you can sometimes not recognise that there's a whole town out there, a whole world out there working in different ways. And I think that in some places it is impossible to cope, but actually there are many organisations and there are people to follow who will really support because they recognise the brain asset of people with experience.
Right. One of the problems is that people are on their own. They are sort of isolated. I was speaking to Beck too last week, and they were saying like union membership is quite down. So people aren't a member of a union. They will get contracts for maybe 3 months, 6 months. We all know about the contracts where it's 6 months and then 5 months and then a gap, so that people aren't then under the Employment Protection Act. There are a lot of games going on, and I think what ultimately we have to do in the freelance world is try to incentivise the independent companies to actually work in a fairer way, in the way that the broadcasters are working. Now, PACT have got a diversity person working on this, and they are getting all the independent companies to sign up about their policy on diversity. And it's not just about having a policy, it's how are you going to implement it. And their great way of incentivising it is then that broadcasters can say to an independent, have you signed up to the policy? And obviously, it has incentivised a hell of a lot of them so far.
Okay. So Jay, when you listen to this, I mean, we're getting into the freelancers, and obviously you work you're a full-time employee. But I mean, would you employ freelancers? I mean, is it difficult to trust freelancers?
Definitely. I mean, just going back to something Camilla said, I think I have a slightly different mindset. I find those figures shocking, but entirely understandable. If you're a woman between 30 and 40 and you've decided you can't make this work, I absolutely respect and understand that. I think in terms of freelancers, it is incredibly difficult. And I think you are in a situation where you are working unpredictable, long hours for short periods of time, and it is almost impossible to organise childcare around that or to have a sustainable relationship around that. But I think there is a part of you that does need to think, if you're going to stay in this industry longer term, about the strategic decisions you are going to take. And even if they don't, you don't get up in the morning and think, today I'll mostly be thinking strategically about my career. Most women in this room will on some level be thinking, well, where do I see children fitting into this? Have I given enough time to having a relationship in my life? What do I think about the balance between my work and my, being a mum and having a relationship? Have I got it right? I mean, I think that on a daily basis, and I think most women think that in these sorts of conditions all the time, and you won't always get it right. but you can find ways through it. I think if you're freelance, it is harder than it is if you're desk-bound, which raises questions about, do you want to get further up the ladder, to be honest, before you're in those circumstances? Do you want to think again about how you approach freelance work? Is it feasible in your life for you to have a period of project work when you can get the support to make it work, and then a long period of time off? Can you make that work financially? So I think all of these things are doable, but you need to approach it in quite a pragmatic way, because you probably won't solve all of them all of the time.
Camilla, how about you? I mean, when you look at freelancers, do freelancers work for
A lot of
talkback
freelancers,
temps? Okay.
mostly
So
freelancers.
Why would you hire a freelancer?
I hire mostly freelancers. I don't have an attitude that would prohibit someone working for me based on their childcare. The only time for me it matters, I personally have a theory that you have to always take the call. That's kind of my point. So if you're in a point where there's an edit that has to be done, if you can't do it because there's an issue childcare-wise or something comes up, you've got to be a big grown-up and make it work for you. But I think in production, that's the way, you know, it's such a key part of working in production that you are self-motivated and able to resolve your own problems. If, you know, that really is such an important thing for me. If you can't do that, childcare won't be the reason why I'd be angry.
I completely identify with what Jay's saying about the juggling that kind of goes on in order to make our lives possible, especially with having young children. And I think that sometimes I hear a lot from women who beat themselves up a lot because they've actually got sort of perfectionist tendencies, and you really can't have that, you know, because it's life, particularly if you're working in television and you've got a young child or several, life is full of messy compromises.
I want to now, there's a couple of people that we've actually put into the audience that have some comments to make, so I want to go to them.
I'm a television producer. I've worked for ITV as a freelancer. I've only been a freelancer for the last 9 years since I had my first child. And I made that decision to try and balance my life and career. Now I'm lucky, I don't have a poet, I have a fireman. He works nights, so for me to get childcare at 5:30 in the morning when I'm going to do this morning was pretty much impossible. So that made me ever being able to take up a long-term job impossible as well. So what I really want and hope that people will understand, and maybe other people want as well, is some kind of part-time or flexible working, because it's all very well managing full-time jobs in big companies and having a staff position, but that's not something I want. I want to be with my children more. I don't want to pass them to somebody else 5 days a week. I want to take them to school sometimes, I want to pick them up, I want to go to assemblies, and I want that all to be part of my freelance career.
I think increasingly that people are going to have to get together and perhaps even form partnerships in the way when you think, you know, French and Saunders writing partnership. There's no reason why there couldn't be a couple of women producer-directors working in partnership, and I'm sure you would be relaxed about that.
People come to me already who are, you know, two women together. I had last week, they're together, they're freelancers, they can't get a job, they both don't want to do full-time, but they've decided what they're going to do is do an ideas workshop. So they came to me and said, here's what we've got to offer you. And I think no employer is going to be stupid enough to think, oh, you're coming to me with ideas, go away, I'm just not interested, because I've got loads.
I did go with a colleague who we were both day producers, and we both wanted to come back to work on This Morning, and at the time we offered ourselves as a job share in any shape or form they were willing to take, we would do, and we were turned down.
That's very sad.
And also on the whole money thing, I've just been told I didn't get a job because I was overexperienced. So
Overexperienced,
Yeah.
i.e. too expensive.
exactly that, yeah.
Right. And how old are you?
39.
Good heavens. So Jay, you know, what's the answer?
I think we have to accept the fact that there are certain things that institutions can do, there are certain things that employers can help with, there are certain things that people in my sort of role can do to facilitate women in your sorts of role to give them a better chance in a work environment. But I still do come back to the fact that ultimately we have to own the decisions that we take, and I think that's absolutely critical. And if you don't do that, to be blunt, my experience is you'll be standing there for a very long time waiting for somebody to help you, and I don't think that can be where you want to get to. I wish we could, at the end of the evening, saying, well, I think we've got that licked now. There are 3 very easy solutions to how we're going to avoid this problem. I don't think that will happen. I think you need to decide what is right for you. I think every single day that you go into work, you'll be assessing, have you got the balance of your life right? And we may all ultimately decide in our early 50s that we're going to leave the industry and do something else. So I think it all comes down to responsibility and believing in what you're capable of and being driven by your own passion to achieve.
How important is it having people like you as your boss, if you see what I mean, in that situation?
I'd love to be managed by me. No, I think it is important. I mean, my experience is very like Camilla's. I mean, genuinely hand on heart, I think working women are quite remarkable, actually. I think working mums are often even more remarkable. Their time management is absolutely exceptional. Most of them are eaten up by guilt every minute that they are wherever they are, so they are more focused than anyone I've ever come across in my life. And I would never hesitate to employ a woman, a working woman, anyone struggling, you know, as a woman to get the relationship balance right, because I think they're incredibly focused individuals. So I think it's an incredibly difficult thing to get right. And one of the things I feel passionate about is it is much easier for you guys if I'm honest about the fact that I don't find it easy either. Because one of the things I always found incredibly alienating is the kind of supermum image of women who are out there saying, well, I really don't see what the problem is. I've got my support mechanism. It's all right for me, Jack. Well, the experiences that I have are not dissimilar to yours. I mean, this week's a classic example for me. I'm out at a work event 5 nights this week. I have a 4-year-old daughter who I won't see till Saturday morning. This week it's gone a bit wrong for me in terms of the work-life balance thing. Next week it might be better, but that's just how my life is.
I'm a freelance AP. I actually changed career when I was 26 and I used to work in the city as an accountant. So I've had the security and I've had the stability and I've had the pension, but I love my job, and I love, you know, it's a constant struggle to move from contract to contract, but it's such a privileged job that it's worth the effort. In terms of what can be done about it, I think companies signing up to a pledge that they have to stick to, so it becoming a policy, is certainly something that all the indies should be talking about.
We've heard a lot about work-life balance. We've heard a lot about childcare. But I'd like to mention the shocking figure that only 9% of women working in the industry are over 50. Who, may I say, and they've been as neglected in this discussion as they have been, are in the industry. I know numerous women who have not only solid but outstanding records of achievement. And they are thoroughly, you know, focused on continuing to accomplish professionally, and they cannot get arrested because, God forbid, they are over 45.
I was working as a producer-director in my 50s, but mainly for companies who I'd already worked with. I think if I had applied for jobs with people who are the same age as my daughter there, they might not have wanted to hire their mum, possibly. And also, there's a feeling that only young people have got brilliant ideas. Well, I had brilliant ideas when I was young, and then middle-aged, and then 60.
I think there is, and we should own up to it. It's probably, dare I say, not dissimilar to the terrible world of banking, a sort of a kind of split between very, very senior, older managers and a kind of huge rump of super energetic, relatively cheap young people. And there is a bit of a culture in organisations to kind of split the workforce in that way. Kind of greybeards at the top, and then kind of whippersnappers at the bottom. It's totally unacceptable. But it is a subset of the overall problem that you know, and by the way, we could probably have an entire session just on ageism alone, it would seem. But it's about, I mean, all of these things in a sense come back to one place, which is about leadership and cultures. And if you don't have the right leadership and they don't create the right culture, then all of these things are the inevitable consequence of that.
One suggestion which might help women stay in the industry, 2 words, very simple: equal pay. I'd really like to ask the BBC, the broadcasters, the independents, everybody of decent size, to go away and do an exercise and just find out, are you paying women less than men? Not because you're evil misogynists who want to ruin their lives, but because you've never even thought about whether you're doing it or not.
Can I just say on equal pay? I completely agree. And we are actually in the BBC looking into just, you know, to see whether there is equality across all of the grades and so on. It's an exercise which is still going on, so it hasn't kind of formally reported at the moment, but at least we're undertaking the exercise, and, you know, with the aim of if there are worrying stats that come out of that, we'll do something about it.
Let me ask you, what do you think we need to do? I mean, you've seen it from both sides, in and out.
As a freelancer, I guess what I would have needed, what I would have liked was more, you know, a bigger relationship with independence, or bigger responsibility from independence towards, you know, I was working for, I think the last independent I worked with was for a year. So, you know, a chunk of time. And I guess, you know, I walked away from that with no rights, with no, you know,
no
entitlement.
pension,
No. So more support, which, you know, obviously, you know, would need to come from the broadcaster, you know, in terms of funding and things. That, you know, that, but again, it is about taking control, as you say, you know, taking control, making the decisions for yourself, and, you know, doing the best that you can.
But do you think the indies should have some kind of, I don't know, standard, or there should be some kind of agreement that they come up with?
Well, that would be great. I mean, that would be great if there was some sort of standard, you know, which looked after working mothers. It's easy to say.
I think there should be some sort of policy to incentivise companies, because I don't think it's the BBC or Channel 4 or the big companies like Talkback where the problem areas are. I would think that there are a lot of people in this room who probably have more problems with smaller companies. What we want to do at Women in Film is we're doing a lot of lobbying with, you know, the tax vouchers and all the rest of it. I'm on 100 committees trying to push that along. But in practical terms, Barbara Broccoli has actually given us some money to really expand our mentoring scheme. If women, for example, go off to have a child, the hardest thing is coming back when you're freelance. How do you get back in? Things have moved on.
So there's somebody to talk to, or some support network?
Somebody to talk to, but also, you know, get your CV back in shape, CV workshops, bit of job shadowing.
Okay, Simon, from your perspective, from somebody who actually, now you're in sort of in the independent sector to a certain degree because you're chairman of an indie, right? I mean, how's that going to go over? I mean, on a small indie, they're just trying to keep the heat on in the office, and they're trying to get those commissions, and there's deficit gap financing, and I mean, it's very difficult being an indie out there, especially
None
a
of
small
those issues are gender specific, fortunately.
Right, but are they going to focus on?
Look,
will they focus on the gender issue?
I think, as well-meaning as they might be, sort of anything that relies on individuals to do better and be more ingenious will almost certainly fail. So I think there needs to be some form of intervention here, because leaving it to the market, which has created the problem, to correct the problem ain't going to happen. And I think there are models here which are really worth thinking about. The Cultural Diversity Network, which addressed ethnicity on screen as well as in employment. What they did was say, this is a really important issue. The chief executives of the major companies and PACT and Sky need to get together, prioritise it, and work out a policy. That had two effects. One was it put it on the agenda of every leader in every major organisation. And two, they came up with a policy because they didn't want to be embarrassed by not having a policy. I mean, the other thing to say is there is a kind of a bigger issue, which is 11% of board directors are women in the UK. There are 6 times more male MPs and female MPs, and some countries have basically said we need a quota here. You know, France has said within the next few years we'll have 40% of board directors will be women, Norway now. So I think there's kind of tons of stuff to be done, tons of stuff to lobby for. If the problem, which I think people have been incredibly even-tempered about, if the problem is severe as it is, not least of all discrimination, there's evidence here of clear discrimination against women in the workplace who are more qualified and less well paid, then you need to address a problem as severe as that, I think, with some quite severe and urgent solutions. And self-correction, as tempting as it is in some areas, may not be the solution in this one.
Could you please join me in thanking our panel, Camilla, Jay, Simon, Rebecca, Anne, and Kate. Thank you very much.